so it's just a good spot to push your equity by betting with a smaller size. So I go ahead and bet 29, then the action's over on the opponent. And they just decide to straight rip it all in. Was not expecting that.
Hey YouTube.
G'day everyone, my name's Leigh and I'm a professional poker player from Melbourne, Australia. Over the month of January, I've made the move up to 200NL 6 max games. Last year, if you've been following my vlog, you will have known that I was playing 100NL 9-handed games, but felt like I was ready to move up in stakes after my win rate there was good enough, and keen to get in some 6 max as well, just because it's a bit more of an interesting game. You're going to play more hands, be more aggressive, which is always fun in poker, in my opinion. So, over the month of January, we've been grinding the 200NL 6 max games hard, and we've got plenty of hands to get into today. We're going to see how many hands I've played, what my win rate is so far, and then we're going to run over some of the more interesting hand histories I've played in the past month. Let's go. All right, here we go. These are the hands I've played so far in January. When I'm recording this, it's the 29th of January, so still a few more days to get a few more hands in, but so far we have played a total of 25,342 hands of 200NL 6 max. In terms of what it's done for us, we have made a total of 3,035 in profit. You can see that I have been running well in all-in pots because my all-in EV has only been 2,672. So definitely have been running over my all-in EV, which is, I guess that's a nice thing, but I think the all-in EV is usually going to be more indicative of what your actual performance has been over any given sample size. So yeah, wish that number was higher, but definitely can't complain. I'm still a winner in these games, and as we move this over, we'll see what our big blind per 100 is, and you can see here without taking all EV into account, it is 5.99, but with the all-in EV, it's 5.27, which I'm actually really stoked with. My goal when I've been playing 200NL has always been to get over that 5 big blinds per 100 mark. As you can see here, first 25,000 hands of the year, I am hitting that goal already, and I am absolutely stoked with that. I've been trying to hit that number for so long. If you guys were following me back when I did the daily vlogs, that was always a number I was aiming for but can never hit, so pretty happy to hit it now, but don't want to get too excited, get too far ahead of myself. We're only 1 month into this thing, 25,000 hands. The amount of variance is going to affect this number. Honestly, I do think I have been running good, just intuitively, so I really do hope that I can keep this number up, but still going to be a battle. I definitely don't know if this is what truly reflects my edge over the competition, but we're just going to have to put more volume in over the coming months to try and lift that number up. So now with the results out of the way, let's dig into some of the hand histories I played over these 25 or so thousand hands. Pretty keen to get into them because I have such a large sample size of hands to pick from. Trust me, all of them are going to be interesting. Let's get into them. Alright, let's kick things off with pocket kings under the gun. I go ahead and raise it up to 5, and then the action gets to an unknown cutoff who goes ahead and 3-bets me to 17. When the action gets back to me here, I definitely want to go ahead and 4-bet in this spot. Pocket kings is going to be ahead of a cutoff 3-bet range, even though this is one of the more tighter dynamics possible in poker. But kings is just so strong, it's still going to be ahead, and it's not a great hand to trap with, in my opinion. I don't even think this is a good spot to trap with aces being out of position. I think I'm just going to go ahead and 4-bet my most strong hands, and I decide to do that with kings here. I go ahead and make it 45, and then the opponent throws in the call. So we get to see a flop, which is 7-4 deuce rainbow. When the action's on me here, I want to go ahead and c-bet. I actually talked about this in my previous vlog, which was the live poker vlog, but in 4-bet pots, usually it's the 4-better, so it's just a good spot to push your equity by betting with a smaller size. So I go ahead and bet 29, then the action's over on the opponent, and they just decide to straight rip it all in. Was not expecting that, but now the action's back on me, and I really have to think about what potential hands can my opponent have. Well, the ones that we lose to are pocket sevens and pocket aces, both of which I definitely think the opponent could have in their range. Some opponents won't 3-bet sevens versus an under the gun open, but some will, and we don't know much about this opponent, to be honest. Pocket aces is absolutely definitely possible. They absolutely could have slow played that in position. Having said that though, I can't fold my kings here because I do think it is possible my opponent is doing this for value with pocket queens, just basically trying to deny equity to ace king if I c-bet that, and I probably would c-bet that if I had it in my range here, which I probably would as well. So it's perfectly logical for them to shove queens here, maybe even jacks. Also, like, they could be bluffing themselves. Maybe they've got like ace king with a backdoor flush draw or something like that. It could be a spot where they're bluffing. So absolutely can't go anywhere with the kings, in my opinion. I throw in the call, and then we watch the board run out. 9 of hearts, 8 of diamonds, pretty clean run out. My opponent maybe could have pocket nines that they were trying to deny equity with, but then we do get to see what they had, and it was 6-5 suited, so we were way ahead on the flop. But look at the river. My opponent hit a straight, so they are going to scoop us on this one. I think actually makes this one of their better hands to bluff with, just because it does have so much equity, and it is actually behind a lot of my ace-high hands that are going to c-bet on the board. So I actually really like the play from the villain, using this as their all-in bluff on this flop. But unfortunately for me, they do get there with their straight draw, and one of the bigger hands we lost over the past month. So next hand, an unknown opponent in the cutoff goes ahead and raises it up to 6. Then the action's on me in the small blind with yet another pocket pair, this time queens. I 3-bet it up to 24. Then the action's back to the cutoff. They go ahead and 4-bet it to 48. So the action's back on me in the small blind, and I think there's somewhat of an interesting decision point here. I could go ahead and fold here if I thought my opponent was super tight. Like, there are definitely opponents in this player pool who will only go ahead and 4-bet kings and aces here. This is an unknown opponent, so I have to take that option off the table. So the option just becomes between calling and 5-betting, and I do think the best play probably would just be to 5-bet here and try and get it all in pre-flop. I don't know anything about this opponent. I don't know if they'll fold ace king or pocket jacks or pocket tens pre-flop, so getting it all in against an unknown opponent's range can be good. But also, if they're 4-bet bluffing, like ace 5 suited, ace 10, something like that, we're very happy for them to just fold that hand pre-flop and just deny their equity and just pick up their 4-bet straight away. So I think 5-betting is probably the best play, but I decided to call here, probably playing it a bit too cautious, just not knowing if my opponents lose or if they're tight. I sort of wanted to play it a bit more conservative, play a bit of pot control, which is what I did. I think it's a mistake though. So we go heads up to a flop anyway, which is 9-5 deuce rainbow. I check it over to the aggressor. They go ahead and c-bet 49. In this spot, it's a clear decision to go all in. Like I said, this opponent's unknown, and they might be using all of the offsuit ace-king combinations as a bet here, in which case we definitely want to go ahead and rip it all in, either to deny equity to that hand or to get paid off by that hand. I could really see them calling or folding with ace-king here, but in this spot, I think it's a good one to go and rip it all in against an unknown opponent, and then they snap me off, which is not a good sign. The board runs out with a queen on the turn. That's a good sign. We know we have the nuts now, so we're going to win this hand. The river is a 7 of hearts, so pretty good river for us. And then we get to see our opponent had pocket fives. So absolutely stoked that we did turn a set, because our opponent flopped one somehow. And yeah, see, I probably should just be going ahead and 5-betting this opponent if they're 4-betting such a speculative hand like pocket fives, and glad I didn't make the assumption that they were a tight player. Next up, I'm in the cutoff this time with ace-jack of diamonds. I raise it up to 5, and then a loose aggressive opponent on the button 3-bets me to 17. The action gets back round to me, and there might be some merit to 4-bet against a loose aggressive player's button 3-bet range. Ace-jack's probably going to be ahead, but I do decide to just call, because the problem is if we 4-bet this hand and we still get action, like, pretty sure we're going to be behind here, and I think having a strong ace in your calling range does make sense, and that's what I do here. And then we get to see a flop, which is 10-6-5 rainbow with 1 diamond. I check it over to the opponent, and they go ahead and bet 16.5. I do think we have showdown value with our ace high, as well as we do have a bunch of different backdoor draws on this flop, so floating does make a bit of sense. Also, check raising makes a bit of sense. If I think my opponent's just c-betting like crazy on this board, you know, they're using all the offsuit ace king, king queen combinations, you know, even like pocket eights, pocket nines, I could check raise, just put a lot of pressure on those hands, and that probably is the best play in all honesty. But in this instance, I did decide to float. But yeah, I think definitely should have considered check raising here against a loose aggressive opponent. We have a bunch of strong hands on this board that we can easily represent, so probably missed an opportunity to bluff raise there. But anyway, we're off to the turn, which is the king of diamonds, so pretty interesting. We do now have a gut shot and a nut flush draw. Still going to go ahead and check it over to my opponent. They go ahead and bet 39.66. Now the action's back on me, and I think I missed a good opportunity to check raise on the flop, but I think it's an even better opportunity to check raise now. My opponent probably is going to be bluffing this turn pretty aggressively with a lot of stuff like ace-jack themselves, ace-queen, or maybe even if they have a hand like, 8-9 that's a gut shot on the flop. Like, it's really good for them to bet this turn card just because they're going to easily represent the ace-king combinations. They can very credibly represent on this turn. They definitely do have a lot of ace-king combinations in their range anyway. So the action's back on me, and I really want to bluff raise here to try and get them off of those gut shot hands and those ace-high hands. And honestly, even if I check raise here, it's kind of a bad spot for like ace-king and king-queen. Like, I have a bunch of strong hands on this board. I have king 10 suited, I have pocket fives, pocket sixes that I'm not always going to be check raising with on the flop. So it's going to be scary for my opponent if I do raise here to put in a lot of pressure. And that's what I decide to do. I put them all in, putting them to the test. Then my opponent hits the tank. And so I know they've got a decision and I'm really keen to see what they'll do. They're in the tank, probably maximum. I'm watching their thing go down before they throw in the call. Did not like seeing that. And with rivers and 9 of hearts, that's no good for us. And our opponent does show us king queen, so pretty good call off from them there. And it's actually one of the bigger pots we lost during the month of January, and unfortunately couldn't get the bluff check raise through. Next hand, the action gets round to a tight aggressive button. He goes ahead and raises it to 5, and I'm in the small blind with Jack 10 suited. Standard decision to go ahead and 3-bet here, in my opinion. A good spot to attack a button opening range. Then the action gets back to the button. And they go ahead and 4-bet. They go ahead and 4-bet it to 45. Now the action's back on me here, and I actually think this is a pretty mandatory call with Jack 10 suited. Even though we're out of position and it's a 4-bet pot, I'd rather call with like Jack 10 suited than Ace Queen offsuit, just because it does play better against hands like Ace King, pocket aces, than Ace Queen would. So I'll throw in the call here. Oh, by the way, we're also like 300 effective, so it's just more reason to call. There's definitely going to be plenty of room to play post flop, so I throw in the call. Then we get to see a flop, which is Jack 5 deuce rainbow, so we do flop top pair, but still have to check it over to the pre-flop aggressor. They go ahead and c-bet 24. The action's back on us, and I think we have a pretty easy decision to just call here. If we did go ahead and check raise to try and deny equity to ace high, I think that will be a big mistake. My opponent has all the overpairs on this board, and really we're going to get more value by calling now and hopefully having my opponent bluff later streets. So I throw in the call. So we're off to the turn, which is the 3 diamonds. I go ahead and check it over to the villain again. Then they go ahead and bet 44, so pretty small bet. Now the action's on me, and starting to get pretty concerned that we lose to my opponent. A lot of the hands in my opponent's range, not only the overpairs, but we lose to ace 4 suited now as well, which is another hand I think they might 4-bet bluff with. So definitely concerned I'm behind, and I would consider folding, except for one thing. My opponent bet like really small here. Price for me to call and see a river is so good that we're kind of getting good implied odds to draw to a 2 paired or trips, and I just get tempted and I do call. But I will say the chances that my opponent is double barrel bluffing using the small size on the turn, I think it's a pretty unlikely. I do think their range is generally going to be pretty strong. So if someone went ahead and folded Jack 10 here, I would not hold it against them, but I got tempted. I threw in the call in this spot, so we're off to the river, which is the queen of diamonds, so unfortunately we don't get there with 2 pair or trips. But this river is really interesting, because if my opponent is betting off with like pocket aces or pocket kings, this is going to be a really scary river for them. Not only do they lose to backdoor flush draws now, but they also lose to like a slow played set or queen jack suited or pocket queens, which are all hands I definitely have in my range. And the only one of those my opponent has in their range is pocket queens, maybe pocket jacks, but we do block that pretty hard. But it's just a spot where I'm going to have so many more of the really strong hands, and really the only strong hands my opponent is going to have is ace 4 suited, which like, do they even always 4-bet that? And then maybe like, ace king of diamonds, but it just seems pretty unlikely that they're going to have a super strong hand to call down with here. So I actually think this is a really good spot to just lead all in as a bluff, just put maximum pressure on aces and kings. And I thought of it in game as well. I went ahead and did it. I put them all in on the river, turning my what was a flop top pair into a bluff. Hop in the comments below, let me know what you think of that action. Is it too aggressive? Am I value owning myself? Will the opponent call off with an overpair? Will they hit the tank? And they're probably in the tank for about 10 seconds before throwing in the fold. Whew. So the fact that they did tank fold, I mean, maybe they were considering calling. with like an ace high or something, but I really do think it's very likely they had aces or kings and we got them off of it with a bet. So absolutely stoked with this one for sure. Next up, we get a middle position limp. Then I'm in the cutoff, ace queen suited. ISO raise it up to 10. Then I get a call from a loose passive button. Then the action's on a tight aggressive small blind. They go ahead and 3-bet it to 35. The action folds back around to me, and I think we have a pretty interesting decision here between calling and 4-betting. I do think my opponent being tight aggressive kind of makes me just want to call a bit more, just to play it a bit of pot control, in all honesty, against a tight 3-bet range. But the thing that kicks it over the edge and makes this a 4-bet for me is the opponent left to act behind. And, yeah, it might even be good to play post-flop with a loose passive opponent and, cool and can induce that. But then we're going to have to play out of position to them, and there's going to be a lot of bad boards for us with ace-queen. Like, even if we do hit an ace or a queen and the small blind keeps betting, like, that's a pretty awkward spot. We're pretty much just bluff catching in that dynamic. So I think 4-betting probably going to be the better play. Fold out and deny equity to some of their bluffs, and maybe even get a bit of value if they do call with a hand like pocket jacks or pocket tens, which I do definitely think is in their 3-bet range. So I decide to 4-bet it up to 80. The button does fold, and then the small blind tanks a bit before throwing in the call. So we're heads up to a flop, and that's a banger flop for us. It is a jack 10-6 with 2 clubs. So we have a gut shot and the nut flush draw. So pretty hot flop for us in a 4-bet pot. The opponent goes ahead and checks it over to me, and like I've explained, earlier in this vlog, in 4-bet pots, you're probably going to want to be betting most boards, and considering we have so much equity, I just think this makes it a slam dunk bet spot for us. And can put max pressure on my opponent's hands like pocket nines, like even pocket queens and pocket kings. Like, they're probably not going to fold to 1-bet now, but it is still going to be a tough spot for them. And we can maybe even bluff out ace king. The hand might float once, but we can start to put pressure on that hand for sure. So I go ahead and bet 42, and then my opponent throws in the call. So we're off to the turn, which is the 5 of spades. The opponent checks it over to me. Now we have the interesting decision. Do we want to go all in, or do we want to check it back? I mean, I don't really see the merit to betting smaller. If my opponent does have a hand like ace king or pocket queens that we can get to fold, I would rather just like rip it all in now, put them to max pressure when we still have equity. If we bet small and then we get raised, like, we're probably going to have to call off anyway. And if I had a hand like pocket aces, pocket jacks, like, I'd probably just go ahead and rip it all in for value anyway. So keep that balance. We're mixing it in the bluff this time. Ace queen of clubs, I'm all in, and then my opponent pretty much calls straight away. So, not loving that news. Until the river's at 10 of clubs. Boom. We do get there with our flush, and it's a good thing too, because my opponent had pocket kings, definitely running hot. This is one of the bigger pots I played during the month, and yeah, good thing I got there, because otherwise our results would not look as hot. This next hand's a really interesting one to me. I'm really not sure about my line during the hand, so hop in the comments, let me know what you think of this one. But the action gets to a passive button. They go ahead and open limp. And the action's on me in the big blind with king 5 offsuit. I decide to raise it up to 14. No, I'm just joking. Easiest check back in the world with a hand this trash. So we get to see a free flop, which is king jack deuce. The action's on me, and I actually think this is a slam dunk spot to go ahead and bet against a passive opponent. I think the passive opponent will float with a lot of like ace high hands, 2x hands on this board, and I can just get a lot of value by betting out. Usually in limp pots, heads up, I'll go bet pot or check it over. In this instance, I did decide to check it over, which I do think is a mistake. I think at the start of this hand, I was sort of just on autopilot, just, focusing on other tables too much, I guess, or maybe I was just like fatigued and zoned out. So I definitely think this is a big mistake, and I should be betting for value against a passive opponent. But then they go ahead and bet the size of the pot, and the action's back on me, and kind of feel like I have to call in this instance with a hand this strong. My opponent maybe could be, protection betting a worse hand, or they could be bluffing like queen 10 or queen 9, something like that. So I throw in the call. We're off to the turn, which is the ace of diamonds. I check it over to the aggressor. Then they check back. And the interesting thing about this check back to me is I think my opponent has a lot of king X combinations in their range that are worried about the ace of diamonds on the turn. I think if they did have queen 10, king jack, ace deuce, something like that, they will probably just go ahead and bet pot again on the turn. So I think the check back does cap their range to a king X hand. And I really think king X is more likely, just because they use the pot size bet on the flop. They might do that with the jack X, but I think king X makes a lot more sense in my opinion. So when the river is a repeat ace, I think this is a really interesting spot with what I should do. In my head, I think my opponent has a bunch of king X combinations, and we chop with most of them, except for king queen. Like I said, I think if my opponent had king jack or even king deuce, I think they'd just bet that on the turn. So really think we're chopping here very, very often. And I get this idea in my head that if I go ahead and overbet this pot, it's going to look a lot like I have trip aces. Like my opponent already checked the turn because they were worried about me having an ace that floated on the flop, and it just seems really credible to me that I would have an ace if I did go ahead and overbet in this spot. And the utility of using an overbet size with this hand is to try and fold my opponent off of a chop by representing that ace. And I decide to go for it in game. I go ahead and bet 25 into 15. Then my opponent pretty much snap calls off. And unfortunately, they did have king queen, which is the only king we realistically lose to, in my opinion. So bit of run bad there that we don't even chop. But I don't know if my overbet would have worked if my opponent did have like king 9. I mean, they're passive, so they might have called off. Really not sure. Hop in the comments. Let me know what you think. Next up, we get a limp from an unknown player, and the actions are made in the small blind with 7-6 clubs. And there's a few different options we can have here. Wouldn't hate folding here. The chances we're going to play at the pot out of position are pretty likely, but I kind of want to raise as well, just because then we are going to have a bit of board coverage when we do get action. You don't just always want to have, hands that hit on like a king, queen, deuce flop. Sometimes you want hands that hit on a 5-4-3 flop, for example. So there is merit to raise for that reason. There's also merit to just like limp. If you do hit a flop, you're going to get safe really cheap against usually, I think opponents limp the button, probably do make a fair bit of mistakes and probably aren't as savage to poker strategy, so playing with them post-flop does make sense, and limping's just, you're going to get to do that for cheaper than having to raise and play a bigger pot out of position. So all three options are fine, in my opinion. I decide to raise it up, and maybe I should just be using a more linear strategy with my raises here, but I go ahead and make it 12, and then the tight aggressive player in the big blind calls, as does the original limper. So we are 3 ways to a flop, which is 10-8-5 rainbow with 1 club. So pretty good flop for us. We do have a double gut shot as well as a backdoor flush draw. So in the actions on me, I do think there is a lot of merit to just going ahead as a semi bluff and betting here. But against 2 opponents out of position, I actually think it's a better spot to check. And I think I'll be checking here with the majority of my range, just out of position to 2 people. Even with their really strong hands, it's a good spot to induce bets from worse hands by checking. And this is kind of one of the stronger of our hands, being a really good draw. But I think it's a good spot to check and see what happens. So I do that. And then the big blind goes ahead and bets 18, and then the button calls. Definitely not going to go ahead and fold here with so much equity. But between calling and raising, I think calling probably is the better play. I think the chances that one of these opponents has a hand strong enough to call or raise with is pretty likely. I actually think the big blinds range in particular, I think they can have a bunch of like strong 10x hands. They're going to call pre-flop with, Jack 10 suited, Ace 10 suited, all those Broadway type hands, as well as all of the hands that sets on this board. And the button's just a passive player. So, they do actually, their range isn't like super, super strong, but I think if they have any 10, they'll probably call a check raise or any type of, open-ended straight draw like Jack 10. So I really don't think the chances that we bluff out 2 opponents is very likely in this scenario. So just calling, trying to hit a straight on the turn, probably the best play, but I didn't do that in this instance. I went ahead and check raised it. I was really hoping that I could get this opponent to fold at 10 and that this opponent was just calling with some bananas and would end up folding, but way too ambitious in my opinion. I should just be calling. I do get 1 fold from the big blind, but not the button. They throw in the call, and then we heads up to the turn, which is the king of spades. My opponent, if they do have, ace 10 or jack 10, they might be scared off by this king on the turn, but they're a passive opponent, so really in general probably shouldn't be trying to bluff them. And maybe there's I made the mistake of check raising the flop. That's a main mistake besides pre-flop, which is also a mistake. I just think ripping in here does look a bit, it's very polarized to either a set or a bluff, and a passive opponent might just be like, they have bluffs in their range, so I call. But I did decide to rip it all in. Whether that's a mistake or not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. And then my opponent snap calls me off. We do not get there on the river, unfortunately. And the opponent shows us that they had king 10 offsuits. Unlucky that they did hit 2 pair on the turn, but say the turns are 2 of spades instead. Not sure if they're going to call off with a 10 there, but honestly, my gut feeling is that they're passive and they would. So really, really unhappy with this hand history, and it's the worst of all the hands I've played so far. Let's hope I play this next hand a bit better. The action's on me, MP. I go ahead and raise it up to 5, and the action gets to a tight aggressive big blind who throws in the call. So we go heads up to a flop, bang a flop, 9-7-6, rainbow. When the action checks over to me, definitely want to go ahead and bet my top set for value here. I think my opponent has a lot of hands that are like one pair. Pre-flop, they're probably calling with like 7-8 offsuit, getting a price in the big blind when we are pretty deep. So I just think like a hand like that will never fold on this flop, and we just really want to get value. Even if my opponent has a hand like ace-jack of spades, like with backdoor draw, I think that hand will call now, but probably not on some later streets if they don't get there. So good spot to go ahead and bet for value, in my opinion. I make it 8, then things get interesting here. The big blind check raises to 26, so pretty happy with this action. I do think my opponent, I said they could have 8-7 offsuit, they can have 7-6 offsuit, maybe even 9-7 offsuit, so they definitely have a bunch of 2-pair hands we're ahead of. So when the action's on me, I do think there is some merit to 3-betting, but in game, I did decide to just call, and that's because I do think some of those worst 2 pairs, if I do go ahead and 3-bet here, they might get scared off. Keep in mind that any 10-8 combination is a made straight. Kind of does make sense to play pot control, particularly in position, just because my opponent probably has all the 10-8 offsuit combinations themselves, so I do have to be worried about straight. So yeah, it does make sense to just call over 3-betting, in my opinion. We're off to the turn, which is a repeat 7. Beautiful turn card for us. We have the second nuts, absolutely stoked, and the opponent doesn't slow down. They go ahead and bet 88, so they actually overbet the pot, which I'm like love and life at this pot. I think the chances that they have a hand like a straight or 7-6 is very, very likely, and I could go ahead and race for value just to try and get all in against those hands. I decided to call in game though. Not really any rivers that are going to be like scary for a straight unless it's a 4th 9, which like what are the chances of that? Like, I just think it might be a better spot to just call and let my opponent bet off a straight. But if I did think my opponent would like never, ever, ever fold a straight to an all-in here, then I would like going ahead and shoving. I'm really not sure, man. Like, it looks strong, but are they going to fold a straight? I'm not sure. I decided to call in this instance. So we're off to the river, which is the king of diamonds. Pretty big brick. My opponent rips it all in. I like break my wrist, snap calling. Then we get to see the opponent had 7-5 of clubs, so they actually check raised on the flop with middle pair. Then they turn trip. It's absolutely sick for them that they did that, but it really, really does make me happy that I didn't 3-bet on the flop, because they're probably just going to lay that hand down, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely beaming. So we'll go over one more hand before we start to wrap things up. The action's on me in MP with pocket 7s. Go ahead and open it up to 5. Then the action gets to a tight aggressive big blind who throws in the 3-bet. They make it 15. The action's back on me with 7s. And I think if any decision I make in this vlog is going to be uncontroversial, it's the one to throw in the call here. So we go heads up to a flop, bang a flop, 7-3 deuce rainbow. The 3-better goes ahead and c-bets 21.66, whether we want to raise or just call. At equilibrium, this will be a board where I would have no raises, and so just calling, keeping our calling range strong does make a lot of sense. Having said that though, I will say there is a good opportunity to exploit here if you're against the type of opponent who can just like never fold over pairs when they flop an overpair. Like some opponents will never do it. I used to do this a lot when I was playing 2-5 against recreational players. Like they would 3-bet pre-flop and they only ever do that with like jacks plus, and then I had 7s on this board. I just rip it all in, just because if your opponent does have like jacks or queens and the turn's an ace, like they won't pay off for stacks anymore. They'll still pay off on the flop when they have an overpair. So against that specific opponent type, I think it's a good move, but you see more of those opponents in live poker when people have to be patient to wait for a strong hand. They really don't want to let it go. In online poker, people are more likely to make those hero folds just because there's less discipline involved when you're probably going to get another overpair in 15 minutes. So exploit I would make in that very specific dynamic, but against an unknown player online, I do think they could definitely have bluffs in their range. They could have the ace-4 suited, ace-5 suited themselves. I want to call, keep the bluffs in their range, and hopefully stack an overpair on the turn. So we're off to the turn, which is the queen of diamonds. Now this could be one of those scare cards for like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, but the opponent goes ahead and bets the size of the pot, so really don't think they have jacks or 10s now. Very likely they have pocket aces, pocket kings, or maybe they're backdoor flush draw, or even ace king offsuit. I think we just have to go ahead and rip it all in here. No, we don't really have to deny equity to anything, but I just think the chances my opponent has aces or kings and we'll just call off this bet, maybe even ace queen, is just like pretty much 100% they'll call off with those hands. So I want to get max value. I rip it all in, and then my opponent snap calls, river's a brick, happy that it's not a diamond, and we get to see what our opponent had. Pocket queens. Absolutely gross turn. I do think the hand's going to play out like this no matter what either of us does. Like, even if I do rip it all in on the flop, they'll probably call off. But yeah, absolutely sick for us that they got there on the turn and finishing things off with a bit of run bad. So there you are, the most interesting hands I played over the month of January so far at least. And in terms of how I feel about my play across that time and my gameplay grade, I'm going to go with a B grade. I really do like most of the decisions I made in, well, these hands we went over. There definitely were a few mistakes. I think I was, in general, way too over-aggressive with my semi-bluffs. The one that stands out the most to me is that 7-6 suited hand. I did not need to lose my stack in that hand. I definitely could have played it more passive and probably still realised my equity and got all in against a passive opponent anyway. Like, I just don't think I benefited from fold equity in that spot. And with a few of the semi-bluffs I took, like, not a lot of them got through. You know, none of the ones in this one did, at least. You know, sometimes I got there, sometimes I didn't. And I just think maybe in general, just a bit too over-aggressive. B grade because I did like most of the decisions, but definitely can't go to that A grade level if I have been over-aggressive and overvaluing hands and stuff like that. So, I mean, the B's kind of good because it does give me a lot of room to grow going forward in the future. So happy with that, but still going to aim for that A grade next month for sure. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end of the vlog. That really helps the channel's analytics, particularly in one that's this long. So double extra appreciation for all of you sticking to the end. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. We've got a bunch of different poker content coming out this next month. I've been playing a lot of live home games recently, and they seem to be really popular. So definitely going to mix more of those vlogs in as I do play these games. I can't promise how regular it'll be. You know, I'm sort of like, if I get invited to a game and people agree to let me film at the table, then I can do it, but I just don't know how regular that will be. But I promise I'll try my most to get them out because I know you guys love those. And additionally, got to be mixing in more online content as well. Just still trying to figure out what the exact format I want to do. If I want to do something like this once a month maybe, or maybe I can do, you know, like once a week. We'll still trying to figure it out, but just hit that subscribe button. You'll get the content when it comes out, as it comes out. For now, I'm out of here. Peace.